having confidence as a young woman from developing countries, I'm from Brazil, it's almost political because a lot of the spaces that we occupy are not often made for us, or perhaps they're made to intimidate your leadership or your voice. Being vulnerable, which is the scariest part, I would say, of this whole process, is what got me where I am. I think my motto is, let's go anyway. I'm gonna go anyway, with fear, with anxiety, with nervousness. That courage to keep following our dreams unapologetically is, to me, what self-confidence, is at the end of the day. I remember one last year in New York when I was speaking to an audience where the front row included Hillary Clinton, for example.
Guys, I left this conversation with Renata feeling so inspired. And I hope that you feel too. I'm sure that you will after you listen to this episode. Not only because of all of her accomplishments, which are a lot. She's done a lot at a very young age. I'll read her bio in a second because it's a long one. But one thing that really stayed with me from this conversation is that Renata just has this energy that she smiles when she speaks, and the way that she talks about things really makes you believe in what she's saying, and really believe that, yes, if she's done it, you can do it too. So it was a great conversation. I'm excited for you to listen to it. But before, I do need to address something that is killing me when I watch this episode afterwards. Guys, if you're listening to the audio, you're fine. But if you're watching the video, my hair, what happened there? I don't know what? I got one of those 3-barrel curling iron, the ones that is supposed to make your hair look very beachy, very wavy, very mermaidy. I was feeling myself. I bought that so my hair will look super tropical for Bad Bunny's concert, okay? And thank God I forgot that back home. Because when you do that with bangs, like, it just looks stupid. Half of my hair is straight, half of my hair is wavy in a way that just doesn't go together. It looks dumb. So I gotta address that. I'm sorry. I apologize. Let's disregard that. Thank you very much. Now back to what matters. Renata Koch Alvarenga is an award-winning, and I'm gonna read this, okay, so don't mind me, an award-winning Brazilian climate advocate recognized globally for her leadership in feminist climate action and resilience. At age 22, she founded Empoderra Clima, a pioneer youth-led organization promoting women's empowerment and climate justice across Latin America. In 2021, Renata became the first young Brazilian to speak at the opening of the UN Commission on Status of Women, CSW65, alongside the UN Secretary General. That same year, she was nominated by Malala as a young leader to watch at COP26. She is on the Environmental Educators 30 Under 30 list, was featured on the cover of Forbes Under 30 in Brazil in 2024 for social entrepreneurship, and received Estée Lauder's inaugural Beautiful Forces Award. Renata holds a master's in public policy from Harvard University and has worked at the UN Youth Office, the World Bank, and the UK government on global climate and development policy. Without further ado, my loves, joining us at the Adults Table today is Renata Koch Alvarenga. What are you bringing to the table today?
I'm bringing to the table a conversation about self-confidence, especially as something that we practice and improve, not something that we're born with. And I'd love to talk about vulnerability and also some practical tips about how we can navigate self-confidently in a world that doesn't always validate us, but that we can find that internal validation ourselves.
What made you want to choose this topic? I'm curious.
I don't think I've ever talked about this topic. I mean, I work in the climate space and also in the gender space. And so this is a topic that's, present in a lot of the work that I do, but we don't discuss it, right? But I do get a lot of questions about people that follow my work or that I meet up with looking for advice on how to get more confident to speak on a stage or to apply for opportunities that maybe you don't feel you're qualified enough for, things like that. And also because I've been reflecting a lot about how to find that inner self-confidence that I mentioned, because I've been fortunate enough in my 20s to, I think, find a lot of professional validation, whether it's awards or speaking engagements or opportunities that made me feel valued. But as I reach 30 very soon, I think more and more I'm thinking about how I can find that within myself and not depend on external institutions or people to bring that to me, because I think that's where true, um, peace comes from, and that's where the true confidence that we can find in ourselves is. So I'd love to talk about it and figure out together.
I love it. Is how would you define self-confidence?
I think the cheesiest way to define it is definitely just a true deep belief in yourself. But I think more than that, having confidence as a young woman, from developing countries, I'm from Brazil, it's almost political because a lot of the spaces that we occupy are not often made for us, or perhaps they're made to intimidate your leadership or your voice. And so being self-confident is believing in yourself, but more than that, having the courage to show up in spaces, block out the noise, block out perhaps external, unjust, unfair comments or feedback, and do the work the best you can do. Right. And so that's what I've tried to do in my journey. But I think there's definitely different ways that you can find your self confidence or even define it depending on where you're looking for it.
Yeah. And you've had the courage to show up in these spaces, even when you were the youngest one in the room, or maybe the only woman, or maybe the only Brazilian, which I find very impressive. And looking from the outside, I think that is one conclusion that anyone can take. Like, this person is very confident. What goes on in your head when you are about to enter one of these spaces, whether that's speaking at a stage you've never spoken before, being at the UN, being at, in all the spaces that you occupy? What do you tell yourself in these moments?
That's such a good point because I think people see me in these spaces and they're like, "Oh, she's so confident, she's so sure of herself." And I do get that comment. I've had speaking engagements, I remember one last year in New York when I was speaking to an audience where the front row included Hillary Clinton, for example.
Oh my God.
And so I was so nervous because this is a woman that's of course very renowned and is a really good speaker, and she's looking directly in your eye watching your speech, and I was so nervous, and I think I spoke still when I was very nervous. I felt my mouth dry up, and I forgot some of the things I wanted to say, and I left the stage actually feeling quite defeated. I was like, "Oh, I didn't do my best." I had just come from the plane. I came all the way from Brazil, and I was very tired, and I was just not in the best space, best place for this talk. And a friend of mine sent me a video after. She was in the audience, and she said, "You were so brilliant," and the video looked fine. I mean, I did not seem, like my mouth was dry or that the words didn't come out. And so I've learned that a lot of this lack of self-confidence or doubting ourselves is in our head more than it is, for external sources. And so you hear this all the time in these spaces. I think I did, one way and someone else tells me something else because people's perceptions of you is oftentimes very different from what you see in yourself. And that can be bad if you're kind of, thinking of yourself in a negative way, or you're overworking yourself, or you're thinking you didn't do as well as you wanted to, and then you get that feedback. But that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I think it does need to come internally. You can't really wait until people come up to you after your talk and say you were great, and then you're like, okay, then I did great, right? You need to walk into these stages knowing that you're going to do the best you can do at that time, and that's okay. And so that's what I've tried to learn, despite the nervousness that comes into my system as I'm about to go on stage, or the self-doubting as well that happens in these spaces. Because at the end of the day, I try to remember you were there for a reason. People invited you because they wanted to hear from you. You don't have to do something extraordinary or, create this amazing different speech that no one has ever heard before. You can just talk about what you do, and that's enough. That should be enough.
And how do you prepare for this moment so that you say, yeah, I did my best? Like, what does that mean? Is it really, practicing as much as you can? Or how can one feel like they are prepared in these situations?
I think that will likely look different for different people, right? Because to be very honest with you, I've never been a person that just over prepares for things, right? I mean, I will study a long time for a test, right? Like a final exam, and that's really important. But I am known to do a lot of things last minute, which is not the best trait, but it's worked for me. I mean, I just know that, when that pressure of the deadline comes along, especially of course not at work, but when it's something personal, maybe I'm applying for an opportunity or I'm prepping for this speech, I know what I want to say, and then, maybe a day or two before, I sit down and I really think through the outline of what I'm going to do. For me, it doesn't work well to over prepare in the sense that I write every single word, because when that happens, I will either have to read it out loud, which is not my favorite thing to do, right? You want to sound natural on stage, for example, speaking about public speaking engagements. But also, I just know that I'm used enough to these spaces that if I write my keywords on a little notebook, that will be enough at that point. So you really need to know yourself and know what you will need for that moment. It may be that you write exactly your entire speech and you memorize it and you prep it and you go there and you deliver it, right? And so I think it looks different for everyone. And to me, that's a key point, because self-confidence is not about following, a list of guidelines on you do one, two, and three before you go on stage or before you do this big job interview. You do what makes sense for you and what will make you feel prepared. And another silly example, for example, in these spaces is that I really like to dress up, right? I like to put my heels on, I do my makeup, and I take a long time doing that before a speech, sometimes more than I'm rehearsing my speech, because I know that if I feel good, that will work on stage. I will just feel more confident. I'll feel more ready, especially, in spaces where it's a lot of older people and maybe, my face without makeup is a little bit more of a baby face. And then I'm like, okay, let me do this nice eyeliner, put these nice heels, and as simple or silly as that sounds, it just helps me get there and be the best version of myself.
Yeah, I love it, and I love that in your Forbes interview, you were wearing all pink. That was so iconic. I loved it so much. I love that outfit.
Oh, I love that. I love that outfit too. And that was super intentional too. I was like, you know what? I'm having this big opportunity, as someone that's not often in corporate spaces. My whole trajectory has been in the nonprofit space, activism space, social impact space. And so I was thinking, what can I do that will be very me in these spaces? And I've always, liked pink, bright colors, and just have that energy. And I think that stays with people, because more than following maybe like a cake recipe, you need to do what feels right for you and what shows who you are most authentically. I think authenticity shows up very clearly when we're speaking about self confidence. And that's what makes people be interested. So I'm so happy that you like the outfit.
Yeah, I really loved it, and you're saying you're highlighting authenticity and that as part of feeling self-confident. I feel like sometimes we get this mixed up in our heads because we look at a space, let's say, oh, you're going into a place that people there are older or more experienced, and you think that what you have to do is become like them versus become more like yourself, own who you are, understand what your value is, and show up as such, right? I feel like a lot of us, we try to pretend like we are just like them. And we feel like that is the best thing we can do in order to be respected, in order to sound professional. So, what you're saying sounds like it's kind of the opposite in the sense of being who you are and feeling like yourself and feeling good about yourself changes the way that maybe you show up? Like, how do you, when you enter these rooms, balance the need of being like the people who are in the room and the need to be who you are?
That's a really good question, because I think one of the reasons I wanted to discuss self confidence as well is because social media, at least for me, is super inflamed, right? Where seeing people, I mean, especially on LinkedIn, for example, post their accomplishments all the time, day in, day out, right? And so you go on a platform like this and you're scrolling, and all you see is people doing amazing. And so, at least for me, there's an internal voice in my head that goes, why am I not doing this? Why am I sitting on the couch and watching a movie rather than being at this conference where this person is? And that I've realized is very toxic and just not how I wanna live my life, right? Because social media, didn't exist until a couple decades ago, and we didn't have this feeling of feeling like we're always behind in some points and comparing ourselves so much. And that's exactly what you're saying. I mean, one way to go about it is, yes, looking at your role models or people that you really admire, and that I've done my whole life. Even when I started in activism at 17, 18 years old, I had people in their 20s, in their 30s, especially women that I really, really admired, that I wanted to emulate or wanted to be close with, wanted to be friends with, or wanted to speak like them, be in the space that they were in. And I think that's healthy. I think we need people to look up to, right? And it's so awesome actually because many of these people are now my friends or people that I've shared the stage with. And so it's good to have something to look forward to or those goals in relation to people that you admire. But understanding that you are your own person, right? And so there's people that are such amazing, impactful speakers in the way that maybe they make people emotional or they deliver words in a certain way that's not my style, right? And that's okay. I think we have spaces for different people in the world to do different things. And I think that authenticity factor that we were just talking about is key because you need to find what's special about yourself. I think everyone has something different to offer. I always tell this to my team and my NGO that maybe you're not the best speaker and maybe you don't want to be. That's okay. Maybe you are an amazing poet or artist, and that will do its own thing to the movement that you're trying to impact or change. And so finding that talent or that thing that really gets you excited to do the work is the most important. And to me, I think going on stage, connecting with people, meeting people at these global events is something that excites me. I like being around people and getting inspired by people. And so I've been in my career trying to chase that in a way that still feels authentic. And I'm not trying to, I don't know, check a list of conferences I need to go to or people I need to meet and go at my own pace. But I won't say that's easy. I think I oftentimes need to delete my Instagram app for a little bit to get grounded and recentered on what my purpose is. Definitely.
Same. And it's so crazy because again, I feel like you're Forbes under 30. I'm sure a lot of people look at you and they're like, "Oh, this person doesn't struggle with that," or "This person doesn't have to delete social media every now and then." Or before you were talking about sometimes we listen to celebrities talking about this also this topic and you're like, "Oh, they go through this as well." And we paint a picture of other people whether that's who we look up to or just our friends through social media and we think that they don't go through something. So she's speaking in front of Hillary Clinton. There's no way that her mouth is dry, you know? So I think it's the comparison can be very useful, but it can also be very, when it comes to, looking up to somebody, but it can also be very detrimental. Now, another thing that I wanted to ask you is going back to this example that you gave of the talk that you gave. It sounded like you I don't know if I can say this, but maybe you were not that comfortable, but you found a way to be confident. I don't know. I often try to separate these two things in my mind, being comfortable and feeling confident. Because a lot of times we are going to challenge ourselves and go to places that we don't feel comfortable because we've never been there before, or because the person who is front row is like, I feel uncomfortable because I haven't been in this position, but I can still try to build my confidence up and show up anyway, or show up even if I'm not feeling my best. So I think there's a difference between feeling a certain way and actually showing up and doing the work and so on and so forth. You have pushed yourself, it sounds like, many times, right, in different places. Do you see this difference between being comfortable, being confident, and showing up anyway? Or how do you kind of organize all this internally of, yeah, maybe this is something new for me and I'm challenging myself, but I'm going to go anyway and not use that as an excuse to stay stuck
Mm.
where you are?
I love this. I think my motto is let's go anyway. I'm going to go anyway with fear, with anxiety, with nervousness, because that's often what happens. I mean, I get a lot of invites that intimidate me or challenge me. And another example is doing New York Climate Week a couple years ago. I was invited to speak on stage next to one of my all-time climate idols, who's Christiana Figueres. She is from Costa Rica, and she was executive secretary, basically the leader of the UN Climate Convention, which is, the UN body that does the climate conferences, the COPs that maybe some people know. Basically, someone really high up in these spaces. But I admire her not only, of course, for the role, but her authenticity really shows. She's stubborn, she's loud, she's very funny. I love that. I love that. She just brings that like Latina energy to these spaces, and it's proven to work. I mean, she is often known as well as the architect of something called the Paris Agreement, which is the most important climate agreement in the world. And she did that by truly being an architect and working with different countries that often disagree, being a true diplomat, bringing them together. So I really admire her. And I was invited to speak on stage, just me and her next to her. And again, I was super nervous, super afraid. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. We had handheld mics, and I remember I was shaking. And I did it anyway, because again, how am I going to miss this opportunity to be next to someone I've admired for like 10 years? And so I did it, and we hugged after, and that was like a top 10 moments in my, career in the climate space. And so going with fear, it's often better, always better almost, if I may say, than not going. Just because I think having that secured like aspect to yourself when you're speaking, or that internalized self-confidence, is not a skill that you're born with. You need to work through that, and that's more and more what I've been trying to do. It's not a personality trait. I really do believe it's a professional skill that you build. And it's not always easy, because you build your career or your reputation or your respect oftentimes over time. And I think as young people in these spaces, I work with a lot of young people that are, in their 18, 19 years of life or early 20s. And they have that urgency, right? Which I also had in my early 20s, of trying to be perfect and do right every time and have the perfect speech. And you won't do that, because practice makes perfect, or almost perfect. I don't believe in perfection as well, right? And the more you do it, the better you become at it. That's been my experience as someone that used to stutter a lot, used to get a lot more nervous when I was a teenager speaking at Model United Nations, which I did for many, many years. And so I think truly just putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, which is the scariest part, I would say, of this whole process, is what got me where I am. 100% is doing things that I was afraid to do anyway, and is going with the lack of comfort. As you said, I'm often not super comfortable when I walk into those stages, but the magic that happens oftentimes is I get there, and when I sit down on like a couch to talk, to my panel or whatever it is, I then remember I'm here for a reason. I have my notes. I know that I'm ready. And again, preparation can be different depending on how you like to prepare and, what your style is. But I think going anyway is the key, because I don't know if this nervousness or this anxiety will ever go away. But I also think that's the beauty of it, right? Imagine if I was just going on the stage with my idol and being like, okay, whatever, next thing. Because then you, in my opinion, lose that spark. And so, and this has happened to me. I don't know if it's happened to you, whether it's like in travels or whatever, but if you do so much of the thing you love and you're going from country to country or conference to conference, I think you run into the danger of losing that spark and just being like, another day. But life is about getting emotional and nervous and being afraid. I think that's what makes it fun. I don't know if you agree.
I'm so glad that you're saying this because I feel like oftentimes we take that feeling as a sign that that is not for us, that we shouldn't be in that place or that we're not that prepared. Or we take that feeling of, yeah, I'm super nervous to be next to my idol. Like this is, and we take it as if, okay, maybe it's because I'm not ready. Maybe it's because it's not my time. No, you act in spite of that feeling. And I like what you said that that's what keeps the spark. And I haven't thought about it this way. And I could not agree more. And I feel like part of you mentioned that you developed this throughout your life and career. And I think also like our brains need to understand that it's okay, the vulnerability piece. It's okay if it's not going to be perfect. I'm going to survive. I don't have to be perfect all the time.
Mhm.
But I also think that self-confidence has to do with how we approach failure as well. Do you think that, and how do you approach failure?
That's hard. I think as humans, oftentimes we're not used to, negative feedback or failing or not doing things in the best way that they can be done. But I think that's what life teaches you. And I'm still learning that, to be honest. You're not always gonna be your best self. Sometimes you wake up and it's not your day. And it's not gonna be, the best work day of your life, or you're not gonna achieve everything that you wanted to achieve. But what I'm learning as well, and that ties it back to that self-confidence, is that it needs to be internal, right? Because sometimes you'll get not so positive feedback from someone on social media, if you're, a public facing person, as a comment, as you said, with celebrities, if you open comments of, a famous singer, I mean, it's so much hate. So I often wonder, I mean, what do you do? Do you read them? Do these people just literally don't look through it? Because we're human, we're affected. And I've heard this from several friends who are, influencers or well-known people in these spaces, that you oftentimes remember that one bad comment, that one person that said something not so nice to you, rather than, the showering of compliments. And that's something we need to work through internally, because we're not gonna please everyone always, right? Speaking of, in a public speaking is fear, but even in your job, in your daily life, maybe you won't agree with your manager on something, or you won't have the best day at work, and that's okay. And so learning how to not internalize that in a way that that means you're a failure because you failed that one time is really, really important. And I've been a victim of that, because I've definitely done speeches that weren't my best, or delivered work that was just okay, maybe not my best work, and understanding, I don't suck. This is not, I'm not a bad person, whatever, is difficult, but really, really important, because keeping in mind the bigger focus of what you're doing is, to me, what matters. And when you work in a space like the nonprofit social impact world, it can be very slow. I think I face highs and lows, because I go to these global conferences and I'm in public stages, and you get instant validation, right? People are posting about you, saying your talk was great, inspired them. But then daily life is literally just sitting in front of your computer, sending grant applications, funding applications, getting those all the time, overworking, being underpaid, et cetera, is my daily life. And then, these moments are just key kind of highlights of the year, maybe 5, 10 times a year. But, the rest of the 300 days in the year, you need to deal with failure and negative feedback. And so what I try to do is just shield myself in that way. And that can look like doing yoga, which I love to do, for example, or hydrating, or having time with your friends, or just finding other ways to understand your value and reach, I guess, your level of happiness, or whatever will make you feel comfortable, in spite, as you said, of the noise, right? And again, I haven't reached that state fully, but I definitely work every day through that, because if we're always seeking external validation, we're never going to reach that, maximum level of confidence, or that maximum level of just being comfortable in your own skin. That needs to be something that comes from within.
Yeah, I agree. And it's such a tough relationship because it is good when someone validates you. We love validation. It's so nice when someone says, "You did an amazing job," or "You were so funny," or "You were so this," and "You're so that." It's so nice, but that is subject to change because if you go to a different environment, you change, even if you move countries in our case, and then all of a sudden, maybe you don't hear the same things anymore because you're getting to know people here. They're getting to know you. So for have that validation. So it's really hard to rely on that. And I agree with you. It has to be something that comes from within. And another thing that I think about is when you succeed at a really young age, do you almost like connect that self-confidence to your performance and your job and what you do? What's it like for you? Because you created your nonprofit at 22 years old, right? You went to your first COP at 18. How old were you?
Yeah, I was, yeah, 18.
So very young. How do you see that when it comes to your self-confidence? Is it too attached to work for you, or how is it for you?
I think so. I think my 20s have definitely been defined by my professional trajectory, which is not bad, right? I think I am someone that is moved by a purpose. And, ever since I started working in the climate movement, it was just a shift. Like, it made sense. This is what I want to do, no matter if I'm in the gender and climate space, which is what my NGO does, or working in climate finance, or just moving across these areas. I understood very young that wanted to do something that would bring me joy, and that not necessarily that my life is work, right? Because I do love, as we've both shared, our love for reggaeton and music and traveling. I think that's really important. And more I've found that. And I think I've always done that. Like, whenever I travel, even when I was, I went to China on my 21st birthday to speak at this event. And I remember, feeling a bit lonely, but then I was like, okay, I'm living this very unique experience, and I made friends there, and we went to restaurants, and we had, an amazing time. And I think that's important too. Sure, you can focus on work, especially on your 20s when you're still trying to understand that what your relationship is to your professional journey. And for me, again, as you said, it is very tied definitely to my identity. But I think more and more, I'm kind of going through my Saturn return if anyone's into astrology.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's time.
Buckle up. Yes.
Exactly. And so honestly, I'm going through that right now in the sense of, okay, who is Hinata outside of her professional life, right? Because people know me as a climate leader, someone with my nonprofit, but my nonprofit is so much bigger than myself. That's not who I am. That's what I do, right? And I think even silly things like you say, I am the founder of, or I am a climate expert, or I am an employee of this organization, this company. That's not really who you are, right? We tend to say that. And I mean, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a little bit, which is, for example, a place that's very work driven. And, you meet someone, the first thing they ask is, where do you work? What do you do?
What do you
And I
do?
mean, yeah, we're both in the US. That's part of it. I mean, the US is a very highly capitalistic place where your worth is tied oftentimes to your profession. But I also worked in Rio, in Rio de Janeiro, where it's a very slow moving, kind of work place in the sense that, I worked in a diplomatic mission, and we would all go out for beers after work and meet at the beach and do these fun little things that you don't see elsewhere. And that was my first job after college in Rio. And so I learned early on as well that yes, you can have purpose and have your identity tied to what you want to do in work if that's something so much bigger than yourself, right? Maybe it's not just a job, but solving climate change in my case, or at least trying to do something about it. It's too big not to just be, a job. It's more than that for me. But at the same time, I will not be able to have longevity and sustainability in this space if I don't take care of myself and also untie myself, at least from time to time, to that purpose, right? And again, it can look like exercise or going out with your friends or whatever else. And to me, it's often something that I've tried to keep separate. So whenever, when I was single and would go on dates, people would ask me, "What do you do?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I really don't want to talk about it," because that's all I do, at work. And to me, that was always very clear, right? And so I don't like, at the bar tables talking about climate change because that's literally what I do all day. But
And I bet people are like, oh, so cool. And they have so many questions. And you're like,
exactly, exactly. So, you gotta find what's healthy for you, and I'm still learning that, but again, I mean, I don't watch a lot of, like, climate documentaries in my free time because I need time away from that, and to me, that's maybe that connection of untying myself a little bit as a person, like, who am I outside of that professional space? But I think I'm still learning that, still a work in progress.
yeah, I think it is for everybody. And that's the beauty, I think, about getting older. And I always say that I cannot wait to be 40. I am so excited to turn, I mean, I'm still 10 years to go, but like, I think once you turn 40, a lot of those questions, they just simply go away. You just feel more like yourself. At least that's what all my 40 plus friends say. And I think that's so awesome. But you mentioned Saturn return, which I love that you did because this thing wrecked me in the best possible way, right? Like it's great because you start coming back to yourself and really understanding what matters, what's important, and being more, I don't know, like owning who you are more. But at least to me, when mine started, it was right when I moved to the US. So I think everything kind of happened together. I was going through this huge cultural move and change and trying to figure that out, plus trying to figure myself out. But I mean, I'm still going through it, I guess, but it's so transformational. How's yours going so far?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, um, it's interesting. I'm still learning what it looks like or what it means for sure. But I think for me, it's definitely reshifting priorities. And I think honestly, yes, I told a friend about a friend from the climate space about maybe I don't have the same patience to do things for free all the time, because as a young woman in these spaces, I mean, you very rarely get these speaking engagements that will pay you. And then, I think as you get older, you're like, okay, this is my job. So you need to be valued for that. And among many other things that, are problematic in the youth climate movement, where free labor is, often encouraged or, looked upon. But for me, I'm losing a little bit of that patience and trying to be valued more. And my friend just said, "You're getting older. You're just getting like that's what it is." I think, yeah, I think we lose a little bit of that patience to just be nice for no reason and really be valued for who we are, know our worth, and dedicate our time to what makes sense for us, right? And so I feel like I'm definitely shrinking my time, not saying yes to everything anymore when it comes to professional engagements, and truly understanding filtering out what makes most sense. So I think that's maybe the theme of my Saturn return is reshifting my priorities and understanding, what do I want to do in the next phase of my life that will make me happy and that will advance my goals and my purpose rather than making everyone else happy, right? So maybe somewhere through that, but I'm still learning about it.
Yeah, I love it. Um, you mentioned the youth aspect and how youth is treated in those spaces when it comes to like free engagement and so on and so forth. I'm very curious about when you go in a room like this with either, leaders, people who have also done a lot and they're much older than you. How do you like, first of all, can you describe what a place like this feels like? And second, how do you, as maybe the youngest person in the room, or used to be the youngest person in the room, or seeing other younger people in the room and engaging with other young people all the time, how can you show up in a way that you are, how can I say, like, that you put yourself, in the same level as them? And by that, I mean recognizing that, yeah, maybe I have less experience, but guess what? I'm going to be the most affected by all of this. So I should have a seat on the table, right? How do you show up in a way that is confident?
I think in climate spaces, especially these global, very large spaces, I mean, like 100,000 people at a conference, for example, the work is definitely very technical, very political. But what I've learned is that these spaces are also very deeply about power. And so when you're young, when you're a woman, maybe your English is not your first language, which is my situation, or you come from a developing country. And I mean, it's not my experience, but even if you are maybe like a person of color, or if you have other kind of layers to your identity where you may be undermined for your ideas quite directly, or people have stereotypes about you, that's really dangerous, right? And that's where a lot of my peers, and that was my experience as well when I was starting out, where you're not undermined even for your knowledge or your expertise, your presence itself is undermined, right? As you said, being the youngest person in the room, I mean, I've definitely had situations where, you know, like I was at a climate conference, a COP, and a negotiator, a diplomat would come up to me and, see I had, I don't know, like stickers on my laptop talking about feminism or, activism and things like that, and immediately undermine me and say, and I've had this said to me where this person was like, "Oh, you're one of those, right? Like you're, just like a youth activist, so cute, right?" And I've had people say, "Oh, you're so
Oh
cute,"
my
to
God.
my face.
Oh my God.
Right? It's like, "Oh, you're so young, so cute. Oh," and truly undermining our presence in these spaces. And, it doesn't matter if you're an activist, if you're doing protests or whatever you're doing. But for me, I was always very much in the policy space. I studied international relations, did my master's in public policy. So I was always very interested in being in, to quote Hamilton, in the room where it happens and be in these powerful spaces. But, you're often mistaken for, someone that's just there doing nothing, or I don't know, maybe an intern if you're not in an internship position, but it's still, if you are, you still have value, of course. Or, you know, even as a woman as well, having ideas or suggestions that you bring into a room validated only when an older man repeats them. For example, this has happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to many people watching. Because again, it doesn't just have to be if you're in global climate conferences. It can be in a meeting room in your job, right? It happens everywhere. And that's because we live in a patriarchal society. We live in a place where these global spaces are not meant for young people to occupy them. And that's a lot of the activism I've done is, saying you shouldn't just put a seat at the table for a young person, because that's literally what often happens. They pull up a chair and, you're there in the room, check. But the reality is you need to change those tables to open space in boardrooms, in conferences, in panels, whatever it is, in decision making spaces for young people to be able to be there. Not just because, right? But because it brings innovation to these spaces. I mean, I've seen people just doing same old, the business as usual everywhere. People are very comfortable in that role. I think being comfortable, as we were discussing earlier, is nice for people, but that's not how we bring about change in spaces where we're trying to be quite radical and innovative and do something different, right? Not radical in a bad kind of a connotation, but but radical in being bold and creative and bringing new ideas. And so to me, I've definitely had a lot of those situations where, again, I've put the high heels on because I'm quite short. And, when I'm next to all these men, sometimes tall men in like a political space, I worked a little bit in domestic politics in Brazil. They truly don't pay attention to you. And I've had friends who worked in government, work in different places where people literally seat them in the back when they're the leader of that meeting because they don't know, they can't imagine that a young woman is leading that meeting. And so it is definitely structural. And so we're not going to change this overnight, but there's little things that you can do, like, you know, putting your feet on the ground and saying, no, 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 I'm going to stay. I understand my worth, my confidence. And it's not always easy. It's easier said than done, definitely. But I think over time, I've definitely learned to remind myself that I belong, yes, in those spaces. If I'm there, it's for a reason. And especially when I'm like on stage with people that are much older than me or have much more experience or, have more external validation, I remind myself that just like them, I was invited to be in that space. And that's enough. That should be enough. But again, we're learning as we go because these spaces, these systems were not made to make us feel comfortable, unfortunately. But we need to change that, one meeting room, one boardroom at a time.
And that's why I think it's so important to occupy these spaces, because you think the thing that keeps being in my mind, whether like whatever area of life we're talking about, is I think there are a lot of people that have a lot to share, but they just don't have the confidence piece of saying, okay, I will show up and I'll try to enter this place, or I will, work to become this or become that. And that makes me really sad. I'm like, I'm sure that there are a lot of people with a lot, not only to share, but to add. And because you don't see yourself in those places, you're like, oh, this is not for me. So why even bother and try? Right. It's such a, I don't know. I think it's tough. So then when you start seeing more people like yourself in these places, you're like, oh, okay, maybe there is a way, and you can start building, I guess, that confidence. But yeah.
Definitely. That's why it's important, first of all, to have role models, right? People that have reached the spaces where you want to be in. But I will say, too, as someone, that made it to those spaces, you got to bring others with you. That's like my number one thing because I have worked with people, including older women, that do not want to open those doors or want to do what we call the gatekeeping, right? Like I've made it, therefore no one else will make it. And that's a big premise of the work I do in my organization. We just went to the climate conference in Brazil in Belém, and I brought 15 women because I was like, I want you all to speak on my behalf. I put them in speaking stages. They were nervous, but they did it and they were so thankful after. And I think it's that paying it forward mentality that I've had with me, people that reviewed my applications essays when I was applying to Harvard for free just because they were kind enough. And now I do that to other people. So that concept of if you reach a goal or a stage or a space, pay it forward, bring others with you, because otherwise the system and the cyclical nature of closed doors will continue. And so I try to do that. It's not perfect, right? We don't often have as much time as we want to mentor people or do things that we want to do. But I think that's a key mentality I try to keep in mind.
What are some of the areas that you still want to work on yourself when it comes to self-confidence? You mentioned being more like inner self-confidence, depending less on external approval, which I think is the journey for everybody. And but is there anything else that you think of that you're like, I want to work on this particular area?
Definitely. I think being very vulnerable, I think the feedback part is still tough for me sometimes because I have a hard time not tying criticism to my identity, which I know it can sound really silly, right? Like we know it's not tied if you didn't do a good job on this one thing or you didn't have your best day. that is not who you are, right? That's just what you did in that moment. And so that's one area that I'm trying to work on a lot more. I will say people ask me a lot about imposter syndrome as well. This idea that, you're an imposter, you don't actually belong to those spaces. And what's funny? As I was younger, I think I felt that less because I was like just unapologetically myself. I mean, when I was a
How's
kid,
it?
I don't do you have that too?
How
Like I was such an extroverted kid when, I wanted people to see me. I actually wanted to be an actress when I was a child. I wanted to be Hannah Montana, but like very
same. I wanted to live in Rio and I wanted to be in the novelas back then.
I love
It's like the whole thing. I did like acting class.
and I was thinking about this before speaking to you. Like, okay, I think the self-confidence part comes from that because I was not I mean, I used to take theater classes, I was fine. But and I heard that once actually when I was a teenager. You're not that good. But I remember I didn't care. I That did not stop me at all. I was like, whatever, I think I'm good. And somehow I ended up using that, right? I think the speaking engagements and that work, you need to project your voice, you need to memorize words, whatever. So I used it in my own way. But I think I've sometimes gotten more insecure with age, which is crazy. But I think it's because maybe we're better as children or, younger people to block out the noise, which is so sad, right? It's like we tie ourselves more to public commentary or whatever it is. And I think I started talking about social media and I'll return to it because again, I use my social media a lot. I've gotten many opportunities there, but I do think it's very dangerous. Like I do think the level of comparison that people do is crazy. I've heard this from friends and I've done it myself. And so what I'm trying to do besides trying to untie the criticism to my identity, and not that I get a lot of hate, I really don't. But again, that one comment every couple of months and then you think about it when you go to sleep. It's like
One little thing, and you're like, that person on February 12th, 2021. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so to me, I try to do this advice, maybe mute people that, don't give me the best vibe or that I'm comparing myself too much to whatever that make you shrink in that sense. And so that can be a social media or offline, but trying to stay inspired to people that you really truly want to align yourself with and not otherwise. And so I follow very few, like I don't know, influencers, like beauty influencers, things like that, because I don't know, maybe you compare your hair, your skin, or whatever, and it's all fake. We know all of this. And even to myself, I try to tell people a lot. I mean, I go to these conferences, but my day to day is in sweats in front of the computer, right? And so, yes, people see the Forbes under 30, people see, the Harvard degree, they see all these things, but the daily life is not glamorous at all. And so, I'm telling this to people so people can compare themselves to a real person, not, an identity on Instagram. And so that I can remind myself. So I think it's a daily practice for sure that I think I'm trying to get better at and honestly getting back to my child self in that sense.
I love that you said that. And I just want to make a comment before, because I have a lot to say about this piece, but I think when you posted about your Forbes under 30 thing, you made this story that I really appreciated, which was saying that number one, amazing, very grateful, awesome, but an award doesn't change anything. And number two, it's not just because like I'm not 30 that this is valuable, right? Like this, I thought it was such an honest, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but I think it was such an honest way of saying, yeah, this is awesome, this is amazing, but listen, it's not everything, right? So I really appreciated that you shared that. And the child piece, I love that you said that because recently, literally like 2 days ago, I posted a video because I got these shoes, these soccer shoes, Total 90. Do you remember? Like the chuteira. It's like yeah. I used to play soccer growing up, and my school didn't have a girls team. So I'm like, but I want to play soccer. I want to play so bad. I found a way to join the boys' team. They told me no, but I insisted so much that at the end they were like, okay, fine. So I joined the boys' soccer team. And I used to wear these soccer shoes every day to school. And I was so proud of myself. And girls didn't wear, at least in my school, soccer shoes. So they would look at me like, what? But I was so proud and so excited. And I didn't care. I didn't care what people thought. I didn't care. Like, I didn't care that the school couldn't accommodate a girl in a girls' team. Like, let's find a way. So this year, I'm like, I want to get those shoes again because I want to bring back that energy. I want to bring back the energy of I'm going to show up as myself and I'm going to honor the things that I like and that I'm excited about. And I'm not going to, because someone else doesn't like them, that I'm going to stop doing it. Or I want to show up with the attitude of like, yeah, I'm a Latina woman, but it doesn't mean that I cannot be in this space or that space. I'm going to find my way. So I got the shoes. They just got delivered 2 days ago, and I recorded a video saying exactly that, that when we're younger, it feels like we're, more okay and excited to be who we are. And then as we start getting older, we start comparing ourselves too much, or we want to belong so bad that we think that we have to be this specific way in certain way. And I really truly think that we find our way back in that regard to ourselves, which I think is beautiful, and then more mature and all of that. But I could not agree more with the child piece.
I love that. Yeah, it's something new that I'm trying to go back to, but I saw a friend posted a photo of her as a child and said, "I'm doing it for her." And I love that. I
Yeah,
love that.
100%. Like sometimes I think of myself as a kid or my sister, and I'm like, what a cool kid. That's so awesome that you were like this or that you had the guts to do this. Like sometimes I feel like, yeah, I wish I had that courage. And again, I think that changes and transforms and evolves, but I don't know, it's funny looking back.
Exactly. And you never know the things you can do when you just are bold like that. I mean, I think about it to this day. I mean, I started my Harvard degree when I was 24 and I'm like, who do I think I was? Sometimes I'm like, what? Why did I apply? But I got in and I did it and I'm so thankful that it's done. But it's these little things. Like I was 23 in the pandemic being like, let me just try and apply to this. And I remember people being like, ah, that's funny, like, whatever. And that's the thing that we need to keep reminding ourselves of, like, that courage to keep following our dreams unapologetically is to me what self-confidence, is at the end of the day. And I try to remind myself every single day, and I tell people this because, just because and going back to the age thing, oh my gosh, these lists 30 under 30, it's like you have to achieve everything by 30. And, we've seen enough examples online of people that, famous actresses, singers that started later and are now doing incredible things. So it's truly not an age thing. So I think it is risky. That's what social media or these kind of lists and things can do. They're amazing in a way to validate your work. But again, going back to the external validation point, that's not where it's at. So to me, again, we just need to unapologetically do what we want to do, and we will fail a lot of the times, right? It's not that you will apply for this thing and get it, because I know that I've applied to so many things over the years. I mean, there's many things I applied throughout all of my 20s. One example is this summit called One Young World. I applied for several years. It's almost funny because every year I'm like, oh, okay, I'll try again. Because you get a full scholarship, it's super competitive. And I got it last year when not that I didn't care about it anymore, but then I was like, I tried it so many times. But then when I got there, I tried to remind myself, this was a dream for so long. So let me live, this dream. And so I think it's important to honor our younger selves in these ways.
I love it. I think that's a perfect way to wrap. Thank you so much for all of this. This is so amazing and inspiring. And yeah, I can't wait to see what's next for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about something different. I very often don't get to bring things to the table in a more public setting. I talk about my work, but I think at the end of the day, this is a key part of it. If we're talking about feminism work, if we're talking about, being confident, being successful, whatever it is, you need to discuss the fears and the challenges and the beauty as well of
Hmm.
learning your journey in self-confidence, especially as a young person, especially as a woman, especially if you're in a place where you're trying to change the system or what we call the status quo, right? Change the current scenario to something different. That requires making a decision to keep going anyway, even when the noise is loud or even when, people are telling you no, to trust that your presence matters, that your work matters, and that believing that you belong in that space you're in will bring about such transformational change that you don't even know about at this point. So I'm really thankful.
I love that. Believing that you belong. You reminded, I just recently reposted a video of Obama saying that. He's like, the difference between you and a lot of people in this room is that they believe that they belong. It's the belief aspect of it. And I'm like, True.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I hope this can inspire people in a way, and if anything, just make people believe that you need to try, right? You need to put yourself out there no matter the result, and hopefully it will turn out well.